Good morning. Good afternoon. On behalf of Bryant Alumni Association, welcome to our first webinar of the fall, designed to share professional expertise with members of the Bryant community. My name is Sade Hunt Shante, class of 2017, and I work in the Alumni and Parent Engagement Office. Today, you will hear from Rita Williams-Bogar, a veteran presenter, Bryant alumna, trustee, and co-vice president of the National Alumni Council. Our webinar will be moderated by Marissa Crean, expert facilitator, Bryant alumna, who is also the co-vice president of our National Alumni Council. Before we start, let's establish the structure for today's webinar, which will last for 1 hour. All participants are in listen-only mode. However, we encourage you to comment, respond to polls, and ask questions using the question and answer feature located in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. We'll answer all questions at the end of the webinar. After today's presentation, you will receive a survey. Please take a moment to provide feedback. Your comments are valuable as we expand our professional development programs. Now, I will turn the program over to Marissa Crean from the class of 1981. She is the program lead for the Hartford's Early Career Leadership Development Program and specializes in working with early and mid-career professionals in management and career management. She has also helped build Bryant's strong alumni pipeline at the Hartford through internships and job placements, has judged at the Bryant Idea Program, and has also participated in previous webinars. Marissa, take it away.
Thank you, Sade, and welcome everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Rita Williams-Bogar, class of 1976. Rita provides consultative services to businesses and individuals in the areas of leadership development, emotional intelligence, ethics, diversity, and insurance technical education. Her mission is to share proven strategies to better leverage individual talents and skills so they reach their full potential. I'm excited for today's presentation, so let's get going and learn more about ethical issues facing leaders today.
Great. Thank you so much, Marissa, and thank you, Sade, for the opportunity to present this webinar to our Bryant alumni. And for the alumni who are viewing, you will be able to view this webinar at a later date if you'd like to do so, as well as access our prior Alumni Engagement Series webinars by visiting alumniconnect.bryant.edu/webinars. There is a wealth of information on that site. So we have a few objectives that we like to cover in our brief time together today. As Sade mentioned, our webinar will last an hour, and we encourage you to type any questions in the chat feature, and we'll answer whichever ones we can as we go, as well as have a little time at the end for any additional remaining questions. So the 4 key objectives for our webinar include identifying the traits of ethical leaders. So there are personality traits and behavioral characteristics that are very helpful and handy for leaders to have, especially since when you are in a leadership position, all eyes are on you. People want to make sure you're walking the talk, not just telling them what to do, but actually displaying the behaviors that you are requiring of them. Secondly, we will discuss perspectives on ethical behaviors. What some people may think is ethical, other people may not think are so ethical. And I'll share with you at that time some observations that I've had in my travels. Contemporary ethical issues facing leaders today. And as we all know, there is so much that's going on in the news right now. Some of those we may touch on. However, there are a number of key ethical issues that leaders deal with on a universal basis. And then providing tools. So we don't want to just tell you how you should behave and what issues you may be facing. We'd like to leave you with some thoughts and some tools that you may use or recommend to others when presented with ethical dilemmas. And we also will make this interactive. As was mentioned, there are a couple of polls, so you'll have the opportunity to vote on specific questions, starting with this very first one that's coming up. This is a poll about integrity. And the source for this particular statement comes from the Pew Foundation. And you will notice that since this is a workshop on ethics, we cite all of our sources throughout the workshop. So the Pew Foundation conducted a study to find out the perspective that Americans have regarding standards of right and wrong. And the people who responded basically felt 78% of the people felt there are absolute standards of right or wrong, meaning things are either right or they are wrong. There's no room for a middle ground. So, our question to you is, in today's environment, whether it's your corporate work environment, whether it's what's happening in society, or from a global perspective, do you think or believe that there should be absolute standards of right and wrong? So your three choices are yes, if you select A, B, selecting no, or you're not sure whether there should be absolute standards or not. And there are so many things to think about with that as people are responding to the polls. To the poll question is there are some behaviors, for example, to take it to an extreme, murder is considered wrong. You've taken someone's life. Well, what if your family is being threatened and in the process of defending your family, someone loses their life, meaning the perpetrator? Are you still wrong because you've been protecting your home and protecting your family? Or the person who is in the grocery store and they steal food because they have no money and they need to feed themselves and or their family. Again, should that be considered absolutely wrong or do we make exceptions? Curious to see how your opinions are on this. Marissa, are the numbers coming in, or what are you seeing as far as the numbers coming in on this?
I need Sharday to share the results.
So yes, I can share the results. It looks like 63% of the viewers voted yes, they do agree. 26% voted no, and 11% voted not sure.
Okay, great. Thank you for sharing that. Yes, because as I was mentioning, there could be a number of areas that could be considered gray. So it sounds like our poll is not that far off from the poll that the Pew Foundation research conducted. So great. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to vote on that. So let's talk about why we even should care. Why are ethics important? Well, first and foremost, if you're in any kind of business, whether you are producing a product or providing a service, customers want to know that you are an ethical organization. They appreciate the fact that you're ethical. If you are selling a product, for example, the customer would like to know that if something goes wrong with that product, you would stand by it and give them a refund or offer to make whatever repairs may be necessary on the product that they've just purchased. If you are selling a service, the customer needs to know that ethically you are going to provide the service that they have purchased. When it comes to employees, employees are not comfortable working for an organization where there is a question of the ethical behavior of the leaders of the organization, or where there are no clear standards about what is considered right and what is considered wrong in that particular company. I have heard of situations in manufacturing, for example, where an employer will have a lot of training done on safety practices in the organization, yet employees are told, well, yeah, you have to be safe. However, we want you to be fast and take whatever shortcuts or, quote, do whatever is necessary, unquote, in order to get the job done. And doing whatever is necessary can mean taking shortcuts where somebody is injured. Ethical companies being more productive, not spending time on bad press, not having employees worry about what's going to happen with their jobs. The legal costs, that almost goes without saying, where you don't want to be in a position to have to defend yourself. Let's think about what happened in the news not all that long ago with Volkswagen. They had such a great reputation for their name and their brand, yet they had devices in 11 million vehicles that were designed to circumvent the system. What drove that? A desire to be number one. Thinking about yourself as a leader, your drives for success, for having high numbers, for having great outcomes, do they compromise your ethics? Do your employees perceive that ethics are being compromised? Do your colleagues perceive that? Because people are taking their cues from the behaviors that we display, which leads us into a few of the traits of ethical leaders. There are many, but this is the 1 hour webinar, not the semester long course. So we'll highlight a few of them for you. First and foremost, being honest. And we can be honest without being abrupt. We can be honest without cutting people to the core. The key is having that commitment to the truth, where people know that whatever promise you make, you're going to keep. That when you give your word, you're going to stick to it. Can people count on you? Do you say what you mean and mean what you say? Or do you say, or others say, what they think needs to be said at that moment? During my corporate career, I rose to pretty high level in management. And one of the things that I found out was it was very difficult to get the truth from people the higher up I moved in an organization. And I always believed as a leader, it's very important to surround yourself with people who will be honest with you. Unfortunately, a lot of people are afraid that there will be some repercussions or retaliation for telling the truth. So my suggestion to you is be honest, no matter what. Be honest. Another trait of ethical leaders is that desire to serve others. And one of my favorite leadership theories is the concept of servant leadership. Rather than thinking these are my people and they work for me, the servant leadership says, wait a minute, I work for them. Rather than being the boss, I lead from behind. Yes, we're setting the examples, but the servant leadership looks to see how can I help my employees, how can I help my followers be the best people they can be? What is the example that I'm setting to help them to get there? Getting the leader's ego out of the picture and focusing more on the followers. Another important trait of ethical leaders is that sense of justice and fairness. And something I really like to point out with justice and fairness is I've heard people say, well, my boss should treat everybody the same. The thing is, if you're treating everybody the same, then there is someone with whom you are not being fair. Same and equal are two different things, and I'll use a math example for that. 2 plus 2 equal 4. 3 plus 1 equal 4. Two different ways to get to the same result. Same thing with people. If I have an employee or you have a follower who has needs that maybe another follower doesn't have at the time, treating them fairly and taking situations into account when appropriate to do so. And that connects with being willing and able to support those differences. Can you look yourself in the mirror? Can you go to sleep at night saying, I did my best to treat everybody fairly? And when you're making decisions, are you making them from a sense of fairness? Unbiased, not I'll help this employee because this is my friend in the department and I'm not going to help you because you're not my friend. It's being completely unbiased to the best of your ability. And our source for
Rita,
this, if you'd like to do further research, is the management guide. Marissa, were you about to say something?
I was going to add in here that unconscious bias often comes into play here as a manager. And what we often don't really realize or think about it as a manager is that you might be um, favoring your stronger players over your not as strong players when it comes to new assignments or that exciting project to work on. Um, the stretch type of opportunities. And so, as a manager, that idea of fairness comes out as not just equal pay or parity around pay or and benefits, but also in how you develop and coach and mentor your teammates. So just a thought out there.
That's an excellent thought because as you were mentioning that, I was also thinking about the reaction that the stellar performers have when they keep getting the additional work. There's a phrase out there, performance punishment. You know, my boss knows they can count on me, so they always count on me, and somebody else is left there not doing their job or not holding up the bargain. And your point about unconscious bias is a great one. It sounds like a wonderful topic for a future webinar.
Yes.
Because we could do a whole webinar just on that topic alone, which is
Oh,
great. Absolutely
absolutely.
great. Thank you. The ability to build community. So, as a leader, how clearly are you able to communicate your vision? Oftentimes, leaders are thinking so far ahead and have to remind themselves that while they know what the goal is and the path they have thought of for reaching the goals, their followers were not in their heads during that process. So, taking the time to help people see what needed to be done and getting there, getting them in support. I'm thinking of a situation where there was a department I was working in, and the department had a very high turnover rate, error rate, I apologize. And my goal, my job really was to come in and significantly reduce that error rate rather than coming in as the new boss and telling people, I'm the boss, there's a new sheriff in town, and you people are messing up. My approach instead was to gather the entire department together, and we had 100 people in this department. So I did this in 2 shifts where I simply laid out the problem and then asked them what did they need in order to be able to do their jobs to the best of their ability. And what amazed me was I got over 300 responses from the staff of the department because nobody ever took the time to ask them what they needed. As a result, every single person pulled together to help the department reach this goal rather than taking the shortcuts that were previously being taken that were contributing to the errors. And that lone wolf, it's kind of hard to be a leader and be a lone wolf. It's an oxymoron. You can't be out there by yourself ignoring everybody else and just going off in a completely different direction without communicating to your followers the change. Because things do happen when you're in a leadership position, goals change, visions change. The key is, as a leader, it's important to communicate. And that is going to connect with later when we talk about the tools for ethical behavior, communicating what is considered ethical and what's important. Additional traits, another trait that is very helpful for leadership to have is, of course, respect others. It would be very difficult for somebody to agree to be your follower if they don't feel they're being respected. And something I'd like to also point out when you're demonstrating respect for someone else's values and goals, that doesn't mean you have to agree with their values and goals and beliefs because we have so many cultures and so many definitions of what people find to be their core values that we're not all going to agree 100%. However, it's important to respect people's values and their goals. I thought I'd include a vision of the platinum rule because for so long we were always taught the golden rule, which I think is still an excellent rule to follow, in that we're treating people the way we want to be treated. So if we want to be treated respectfully and ethically, we will treat people respectfully and ethically. The platinum rule takes that golden rule and kicks it up a notch and basically says, I need to take the time to find out, what does being respected mean to you, so that I can treat you in the way you need to be treated without projecting my needs onto you. And as a leader, that is so critical and connects to the point made earlier about treating people fairly. And then allows for opposing views. So, a distinction I'm making here is the difference between leaders and people who happen to be in leadership positions. Because just because somebody's in a leadership position with a formal title does not mean they are actually a leader. So these traits are embodiments that I strongly recommend and supported by the management study guide that leaders adopt. Can you handle somebody who has a different opinion than yours? Think of leaders or people in leadership positions you may know who don't want to hear anything that disagrees with their point of view. My philosophy is, hire people who are smarter than you at what they do. Give them the tools, give them the resources, allow them to think and get out of their way so they can do what needs to be done, yet be there as a resource. So moving into some challenges, and I'd like you to think in terms of your personal organization, whether you work for a company, you work for yourself, you work for a government entity, a nonprofit, an educational institution. What policies may be in place with respect to gifts and gratuities? Are you allowed to accept gifts? What happens if somebody comes to your workplace during the holiday season and decides they want to drop off some very expensive cookies? Is your policy that it's okay as long as everybody shares them? Or is the policy, nope, you cannot accept it? There are some educational institutions in the area of the country where I live, and every October, late October, early November, we receive the email that says you are not to accept anything, nothing from a vendor, nothing from a student. And if you try to give it back and the person does not accept it back, then you've got to turn that gift over to the ethics officer for the organizations. And then there are other organizations who say, what? Not accept anything? You're kidding me, right? And they allow for gifts and gratuities. Personal gain. Have you seen employees or people in the workplace who will use their workplace's equipment for their personal work? For example, I know of an area where townspeople happen to own a landscaping business, and they were still performing private landscaping work with their municipal clothes on. So there was a perception of personal gain, even though what it was, the guys left work and they didn't change clothes. From then on, they changed clothes because optics are important as well. What are people seeing when they look at you? What kind of conflicts of interest might there be? One I will share is that I recommend a number of resources to people to continue after a workshop. And I have no conflict of interest because I don't get paid for any of the things that I recommend. Misuse of social media. We have a question for you later in our session today about what to do if somebody is misusing social media, posting about their coworkers, posting about customers, posting about clients. Dress code improprieties. If you are in an organization where you wear a uniform to work, are you allowed to stay in that uniform when you're conducting personal business? For example, I was doing this workshop at a municipality, and there were people who did wear uniforms for work and they were running around on personal business. Granted, it was their lunch break, but again, perception. Stealing time. Whose start time is 8 o'clock, and they get there at 8 o'clock, go to the cafeteria, get some coffee, chat with a few people in the hallway along the way, and get back to their desks about 8:30 and figure, okay, I'm working now. And they've stolen 20 minutes from the organization. Protecting confidential information, I think, is self explanatory. A question comes in what steps are you taking to protect others' confidential information? There was someone I was speaking with just yesterday who works for a dental insurance company, and this person conducts fraud investigations. And so when conducting the investigation and providing the follow-up in writing, they still have to be careful not to release personal health information that belongs to the various patients, because what if that letter ended up in the wrong hands, or the result of the findings ended up in the wrong hands as well? And a couple more items. And Marissa, I'll be curious to see if you've run into or encountered people who have faced some of these challenges and how they may have handled them. Employee behavior. So whether it's the employee or if you, the leader, who is also the employee of the organization that you are with. If somebody comes to you with a problem they are having with another employee, do you downplay them? Do you mock them for bringing this to your attention? Or do you take it seriously and conduct the appropriate investigation? Working conditions, think back to my comments earlier about safety. Are the working conditions such that employees have safe access to exiting if something should go wrong? I remember one of the chicken factories was locked and people could not get out, and they died when a fire took place in their business. That was definitely an unethical situation that people were working in. Customer relations. Are you treating your customers fairly? Or are there people who decide, let me give this customer a perk that I'm not going to give to the other customer because I really want to get their business? And even in volunteering, there are some employers out there who do mandate the types of activities their employees can volunteer for, and want to tell employees that they have to prescribe to and subscribe to a specific entity. I'm thinking of a situation where one employer collected funds for a charity that the employer supported, yet when a few of their employees lost their homes due to a natural disaster, the employees were not allowed to take collections up for their coworkers. So the very next year, when the employer came out and said, we're collecting for our charity again, I'm sure you can imagine how few contributions there were with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then transparency as another one. So often we like to be able to tell our employees, tell our staffs, tell our coworkers everything. Unfortunately, there's some information that you receive when you are in a leadership position that you're not able to share with everyone. And of course, we have a polling question that relates to that as well. I always like to tell staff members that I will be as transparent as I can, and that there are some things that I will not be able to tell you. That way, there's never the perception that I'm hiding anything from them. So, Marissa, at this point, have you seen these types of challenges or other types of challenges from an ethical perspective that people have managed to work their way through?
Oh, oh, definitely. I can think of a number of different scenarios that a company could find itself challenged with. Working for an insurance company, um, I think many years ago, it identified ethical behaviors and trust being a key value for us to be able to present to the outside world, to customers and potential customers. And so as a company, we have very clear ethical policies and procedures and training, and as a result, we actually win an ethical award, a worldwide ethics sphere type award every year. I think we've had it 9 or 10 years in a row now. And so, but it takes a lot to get to that point. And really, I think all of these situations as a leader, you really just have to look at it and see what is really the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. Stealing time is an interesting concept because you think about it as in terms of how people show up to work, and here they're supposed to show up at this particular time, and then they go off and have breakfast for half an hour, and they honestly could do that in the middle of the day as well. With the ability to work remotely, or as the larger the company, and the more likely that it's got field offices, and basically your employees are, you can't visualize them, you can't see them and know what they're doing all day long. So there does come a point of trust, and knowing that no matter when that person's working, whether it's from 8 to 4 or 5 or 6 to 10, and then they take a break and go walk their dog, and then they come back. I mean, I think that that's got to be a conversation of what's expected, and when you feel like you can, when you'll commit to getting your work done, and as long as it sort of fits in with the company, the company's needs, then I think you're kind of okay.
That's a very good point. I was talking with someone recently as a follow-up to another webinar I had done on leading and motivating remote team members. And somebody came up to me and said, I have employees who want to work remotely, but I need to know what kind of systems that I can find out there to check up on them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and
As
I
in,
said,
are they?
first and foremost, trust.
Yeah. Yeah. You do, and so I do think working with a lot of young people as well, there's sort of this thought like you're they tend to actually want to work remotely a lot, or have a lot of flexibility and work-life balance. That's sort of what they're used to, especially coming out of college. They've learned to balance everything.
Hmm.
And so they're kind of like looking to do that when they get to work, and it really does depend on the job and the expectations, and realizing that whether you're physically there or not, you have to be present, and when the rest of the team is working,
Right.
because you're not going to be there to answer the question online when the
Hmm.
question comes up. So yes, so they're not like looking over to the next cubicle, but they're, you can go online and ask a question. And so I think it's just also a matter of being really clear about what you're supposed to do, and delegating, and that sort of thing.
Great. Thank you.
It is a challenge. Yeah.
It really is. So, participants, those out there engaged in our webinar, we have another polling question for you. So, here is a what would you do type situation. So, you're in the position where you happen to hear a conversation that some people in your specific department are going to be laid off within the next 6 months. Unfortunately, you were not supposed to hear this. This is confidential information, and you are not to have any type of knowledge of it, but you heard it. And you realize that your best friend is in the department where the layoffs are going to occur. And because this is your BFF, you know that she and her husband are planning to buy a new house in a few months. what would you do? Would you tell your friend that she better watch out and needs to look at not buying that house because her job might be on the line? Would you instead hint to her that there might be some layoffs coming in the organization? Or your third option is, would you say absolutely nothing to her and just wait and see what happens? Because often, as we were talking about transparency, when you are in a leadership position, you may hear things that you don't want to hear or don't need to hear, or you hear them because you are part of the leadership team. And I can remember being in the situation where there was talk that our employer was going to leave the state. And if they left at the time that they said this, then a number of people were going to be out of work. And so at one point, it was in the rumor stage for about 6 months or so. It was in the rumor stage. And then finally, our local vice president did gather all of management together to make the announcement that, yes, in fact, the company was planning to leave the state. And at that point, those of us in leadership positions had to have meetings with our staffs to let them know this was coming. But during that first 6 months of, is it happening? Isn't it happening? What's going on here? What am I hearing? There were other people besides those of us in leadership positions who were hearing this. And it was kind of challenging when people would come and say, I heard this is coming. What do you know? So, Charday, how are our poll results coming through on this?
I was
And
going to say, oh, yep, it's okay, Rita. I have access to the results now. So 53% said say nothing. 26% hint around in conversation about a layoff rumor, and 21% tell your friend. And of course, I could not actually vote, and I guess the right answer might be say nothing, but man, I'd be hinting around in conversation about a layoff. I, I find it really hard not to hint about it.
it would be hard. I can't say that I would be comfortable saying absolutely nothing. Maybe well, did you hear what's going on out there? I would definitely not say, you know what, I heard your department is going to be laid off, because it's still in the rumor stage also.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and that's the key, I think, because it's still in the rumor stage, it may or may not come to fruition. It may be a situation of people are talking, and that's one of the many options that they are considering. So, yeah, I kind of support that hint that here's some things that I heard. Not that they're definite. So, something for the audience to think about. If you are faced with unethical or illegal practices, what are the choices that you have on how to handle them? Let's say somebody has come to you and said they are being harassed at work. What do you do? Because you know harassment is not only immoral and unethical, it is also illegal. And they come to you and they say, well, I really don't want you to say anything to anybody else. I don't want to get anybody in trouble. What are your choices? And since this is a legal issue, it's important to know what the procedure is at your workplace for handling that. Because when something like this is done, which we see in the news all the time now, and that more people are comfortable putting the situations out there that they have experienced, an investigation has to be done. You can't just say, well, I won't say anything to anybody. You need to know whom in your organization you need to contact. Or somebody comes to you and said that somebody was stealing or they're disparaging customers. Or what do you do when your superior in the workplace asks you to do something that you clearly know is incorrect? Saying no, I believe, is the way to go. And if you're in an organization which behaves unethically, then the question becomes, is this a place where I really want to work? Using a real life example, just yesterday I was speaking with someone who felt that she had been set up by her employer to be fired. And she worked in a law firm whose job was to collect debts. And her boss had two assistants. And there was one assistant that he was friends with from whenever, for whatever reason. And he had to cut down his assistants. But he never said cut down from two to one. And he never said to the person who was speaking to me that she was doing her job poorly or anything. So he had her type up some information, letters that had to be mailed out for whatever content. We didn't get into the content. He then took the letters back and read them, signed off on them, and then handed her one specific letter and said, "You are to mail this letter to X." And she said, "No, this letter is supposed to go to Y." And he says, "No, I want you to mail it to X." And she kept pushing back, pushing back, pushing back. And finally he said, "You better do what I told you to do." So she mailed the letter. Now, mind you, this is coming from a law firm with confidential information in it. The letter went that he told her to send, she sent it where he directed her to, and it went to the wrong party. She gets called into the human resources office and is terminated. Her employment is terminated on the spot. She was told it is a violation of company policy to send confidential information out to somebody other than who it belongs to. And so she attempted to defend herself, saying, "I said no, he made me do it." And they said, "Well, whether he made you do it or not, you're fired." I was sitting there doing my best not to have my mouth hanging open because the boss did this clearly because he wanted to get rid of her instead of just coming out and saying, "I can only have one assistant." He found a way to terminate her employment. And so I asked her, "Is that the type of company where you'd really want to work?" Because the ethics was not there. That was very sneaky and horrible way that he undermined her employment to the point of her losing her job. So, of course, her response was, "I'd never want to work for that kind of company again. I just did what I was told because I needed my job." Faced with that unethical practice, she did the right thing about pushing back. And I would strongly encourage to not give in when somebody tells you to do something unethically and protect
Yeah,
yourself that way.
right.
Yeah.
I was going to add that most companies also have a process for reporting unethical behavior in a anonymous way. Not well, a way that protects you, the so-called whistleblower. And so I think that working for a company, knowing what those whistleblower rules are, or what to do when you are faced with ethical questions, even if you're not sure it's unethical, but being able to raise your hand and get an alert to somebody other than your manager or your manager's manager type of thing is probably a good idea to do in that type of scenario, so you don't get caught
Agreed.
doing the wrong thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's a good point because there should have been somebody she could have gone to
Right,
when
and
that happened.
I did want to mention Richard's on the call, and he's been doing a great job talking to us through the question format, and he brought up back to the poll that it really, in his mind, like if I think it depends on how he found out about it, he would have answered maybe a little bit differently. So if he found out about it and they knew he found out about it, and then they probably would have said to him, "Now that you know, you need to keep this confidential." But if it was, by their own mistake and they really didn't know that he knew and they were being sort of sloppy about it, he might feel a little less loyal to the company and more loyal to his friend. And I'm
Oh, okay.
paraphrasing for Richard there.
Yeah, good point. How did the person hear about it? And
Yeah.
then the loyalty to the company. Yeah, because there may be a case of, well, what else is going on? Am I next?
Yeah.
Yeah, good point. Thank you, Richard. So here's another. What would you do? I feel like I'm channeling John Quinones with his show. What would you do? I was debating whether I was going to put in the slides the picture I have with him, actually. He was the keynote speaker at a conference I was attending. And I was walking down the hall and I heard this voice, which is very distinctive. And he was in front of the step and repeat. So I photobombed him. I basically said, "You film in my town, so I need to have photos with you." And his response was, "As long as you tweet about it." So I did. So you've got an employee who came to you and they said one of their coworkers is having a really bad day. And the coworker, in frustration, posted some comments on social media, some negative comments, of course, because otherwise this wouldn't be a concern. Negative comments on social media about the quote, crazy, annoying, close quote, customer she just spoke to on a call and complained about her manager wouldn't do anything about it. How would you handle that situation? Would you just let the coworker, and this is not a poll, it's more food for thought, or if you like to type your thoughts into the chat, we'd love to read what you have to say. Because there are people who seem to think that, well, it's my Facebook, it's my Instagram, I can post whatever I want to post. I have freedom of speech. Yet this employee is at work. This employee is using work equipment to access their personal social media accounts. And they're posting comments about customers and their manager on social media. What would you recommend, or what would you do if you found yourself in the position of somebody coming to you telling you this has happened, that one of your employees is actually doing this? Would you just let it go and just say, well, they're having a bad day, or what? And while folks are typing their responses, I'll share with you a similar situation. Someone I know worked in a healthcare type role and worked the overnight shift. And this is exactly what the person did. She was posting about these crazy patients who are coming into the facility. I can't get over how crazy these people are, and on and on and on. And she posted this on Facebook. And I happened to see it and I replied, take the post down. That is inappropriate. You're at work. You're talking about health information, not hard to figure out who you're talking about because we all know you and we know where you work and you're on the third shift. And her response was, well, it's my Facebook. And my question back to her was, well, what happens when I share this with my friends and they share it with their friends and they share it with their friends? This is no longer just your Facebook. It's now gone viral. She took the post down. That was not a worker, coworker, employee situation. So, Marissa, are we getting comments about this?
We're not getting any comments, but I have a situation I would share, very different kind of circumstances, but a nonprofit executive director was posting on her Facebook a strong political opinions, I'll put it at that. And board members pointed out to her that donors that she's connected with on Facebook might see this and take offense to what she was saying, and that would not be a good thing for the nonprofit organization.
Oh, good point, because they would see that she's doing it in her role.
Right, right,
Yeah, very good point. Back to optics. What are people seeing and perceiving?
right,
Good.
right.
So I'll let folks think about this. So some
And
tools.
I'm also
Yeah.
giving you your 10-minute warning. Did you get that?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. and some tools on avoiding ethical dilemmas. This ties in with what I was talking about earlier about communications. It is important if you are in a leadership position to make sure that your staff members know what's expected of them from an ethical perspective. There's an organization I belong to, and one of the things they make very clear, and it's all over their documentation and in their behaviors, is that we operate at the highest ethical standards. There are no shortcuts that are taken. And rather than thinking about even taking any shortcuts, come to a member of the leadership team if you're not sure about something. Don't automatically say yes. So, just like the woman who said her boss was telling her to send confidential information to the wrong party intentionally, she could have just said, okay, but she at least spoke up, learning when to say no and how to say no. I always love the example of don't be the frog. So, if you take a frog and you put that frog in a pot of boiling water, what's it going to do? Jump out because it knows this is a life threatening situation. It's a hot environment. It's somewhere where I don't need to be. On the other hand, if you put this frog in a pot of cold water and you set that pot on a heating source and you gradually increase the temperature, the frog does not leave. The frog just adjusts to the temperature of the new environment. Don't be that person who, at first, you might say, well, there are things that are unethical here, so I'm just going to not do anything about them. This is who they are, this is how they are. Choose not to just adapt to that environment, but look for correct behaviors. And don't be nosy, and that's from a negative perspective. Nosiness is different from curiosity. Curiosity, you're trying to learn. Nosiness, let me go see who else might be getting laid off. Is this really happening in 6 months? And then, of course, as the leader, the biggest thing is you need to be the one who's behaving ethically. People are watching and people are following you.
I was going
Another
to
tool,
just do a,
yes,
oh, if I could just, so
sure.
we did have a lot of people throwing, putting out ideas in the question box, and of course I'm like looking in the chat. So I just wanted to throw out what some of them are saying. Basically, they really get this whole idea about uh, ethical behaviors and what, that the right from wrong. People are suggesting that you should speak to the employee. Um, I love one person said she uses headphones at work for the craziness. So certainly she's taken the advice of don't be nosy and just sort of stay out of it. A good reference point is an employee handbook. So that's very really, if your handbook doesn't address it, then making that suggestion to the company to make sure it does address those specific type of situations, updating it for the world we live in today. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Excellent point. Because there's a client I'm working with right now, and this organization has nearly 200 employees, and they do not have a process in place for reporting unethical behaviors. And they do not have an ethics handbook. And they have had some harassment situations going on in their organization. And one of their HR people came to me and said, I need you to come in and train our management team on what we need to do and what kind of practices we should put in place. Because when the employees came to us and complained about what was happening, we didn't know what to do. And coming out of the corporate environment, Marissa, I was making the presumption that, of course, everybody's got a handbook. And it still surprises me to this day that there are employers out there who don't. And some are willing to learn and some are not. So I appreciate those comments from our attendees. Another thing, the smell test. What does this smell right? And if it doesn't, maybe I ought not to do it. Would I feel comfortable coming home from work and telling my kids, this is what I did today? I took this shortcut and somebody got injured as a result, or if that did end up on social media, would I be embarrassed? I'm thinking of a principal who sent an email out to parents chiding them, chastising them about specific actions, and his email was full of grammatical errors. So, of course, people shared that all over social media. I already asked about, can I look myself in the mirror and live with myself? Not only my kids, my parents, my grandparents. Would I be comfortable telling them that I did this, or this is what I faced and I did or did not do something about it? Another tool, there are many tools and processes out there. I like this one because it connects pretty much with one of the comments or some of the comments that actually were provided today. And the Potter box was developed by Ralph Potter in 1965. He was part of the Harvard Divinity School. So it gives you several steps to follow. And they almost seem intuitive. It's nice when you can see all of them in one place. So the first thing, starting at the top, is looking at what happened. What was the action? What is it that caused the dilemma that I'm facing? Such as the employee who was told to send something to the wrong entity, and then keeping track of the situation: who, what, when, where, why, and how. So for those of you who do have an ethical officer to report to, or that's assigned to your HR department or to your manager, make sure you have all of the facts. What are the values by the dilemma, such as credibility, trust, reliability? Are these things all called into question? What are some principles that come into play? Is this something that's affecting human life? Or is it something you personally believe what's right or what's wrong? And then where do your loyalties lie? And then coming back to the policy and or the action. How will you do things to solve the dilemma, to alter the situation using the information that you've gathered in those steps? And so this is a way of seeing it. For the last one was a way to see it if for those who like graphical representation. This one is a way of seeing it for a clean, clear list of bullet points. Same thing. Is there an ethical dilemma? Know the policies, just as we talked about. Is this something that requires legal action or not? If there's no documentation, it's kind of hard to bring it to anyone's attention, and then getting people involved. Which brings us to our last poll of the day, which ties this all together. So if we could have the poll available. We have an employee who works for you, and this employee said, oh, we got this money in from a customer and I forgot to take it to the bank. I forgot to make the deposit. But then you found out he actually spent the money to buy groceries. So now that he knows you know how he really used the money, he says, I'll make it up. I'll put the money back before we have to reconcile our bank account at the end of the month. So what would you do? Would you let it go and say, well, he's having a hard time financially, so he's going to make it up. That's fine. Would you fire him on the spot? Would you report this action to law enforcement? Or would you tell him, you know what, you need to resign? You just need to quit the job and we'll just forget everything that happened as long as you leave the company. Keeping in mind that theft is an illegal act, because despite the fact that he claims to have forgotten, he actually has stolen from the company and stolen from the customer or customers. And I know we just have a couple of minutes left, Marissa, so I'll be curious to see what others may have started responding on this
It's
one.
about it's about one third for fire him, report to law enforcement, tell him to resign, and I think probably one or two people let it go.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to see people were choosing B, C, and D because it is an illegal act. Letting it go, my question would be, can I trust this employee in the future? Because if he did this today, will he do this again in the future? And a question I'll leave for everyone to ponder as something that was helpful. If you like to email either of us or Charday at Bryant to let her know, that would be great. And would love to leave you with a quote from Roy Disney, the brother of Walt Disney. When your values are clear to you, making decisions becomes easier. So, Marissa, I'll turn it over to you to close out.
Okay, thank you so much. So thank you everybody for coming, and thank you Rita for this engaging conversation. We really had a lot of more ideas coming in at the end from our attendees, so that's great. And then if you want to stay involved or get more involved with Bryant, please go to our website, alumni.bryant.edu. And there's just a number of ways to get involved, particularly a really simple one. If you're on LinkedIn, this is really, really simple, is joining Alumni Fire. And when you do that, you can find a student or another alumni connecting with you based on your LinkedIn profile, as well as the company you work for. If they post positions out on Indeed, there's an automatic sweep of those positions to Alumni Fire, so you help your company hire Bryant talent. And with that, I will say thank you, and everybody have a great day. And also don't forget, you can get a re-listen to this from our website. It's all been recorded. Thanks, everybody.
Take care, everyone. Thanks, Marissa. Thanks, Charday.